Welcome to the Knowledge for Men show. Your life will never be the same.
Your level of success will seldom exceed your level of personal development.
I want to die empty of regret. I want to die empty of my best work. We don't understand who we are. Instead, we're living out somebody else's narrative.
What one man can do, another man can do. If it's been done, it can be done again.
Being yourself and being your truest, most authentic self in every moment. If it scares you or makes you a little afraid, do it. Follow your heart and your gut.
The first stage, I think, is finding you, like finding out who I am today.
Stuff will not work. You will have things that fail. Success is when you're a happy, fulfilled person. How do you define success?
It's your life, and you are the creator of the movie script that is your life story.
The all-new FreshBooks makes ridiculously easy accounting software that's completely transformed how freelancers and small business owners deal with their day-to-day paperwork. It's been redesigned from the ground up and custom built for exactly the way you work. Get ready for the simplest way to be more productive, organized, and most importantly, get paid quickly. The most important thing for everyone listening is that getting started on FreshBooks is extremely simple, even if you're not a numbers person. Actually, especially if you're not a numbers person. FreshBooks is offering a 30-day unrestricted free trial to my listeners on Knowledge for Men. To claim it, just go to freshbooks.com/men and enter Knowledge for Men in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Again, that's freshbooks.com/men and enter Knowledge for Men in the How Did You Hear About Us section. All right, guys, welcome to the show. I'm here with Charles Duhigg. He's a Pulitzer Prize-winning writer, best-selling author of Smarter, Better, Faster, The Secrets of Being Productive in Life and Business, and the Power of Habit, Why We Do What We Do in Life and Business. Charles, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Good to have you here. And Charles, we start off every show with a favorite success quote or some sort of saying that you've lived by. So what do you got for us?
Could be I have no idea.
It could be from your book, but it could be about habits, productivity, or things that you're kind of contemplating.
I don't know. I don't really have like a quote that like I tell myself. I just kind of try and get things done every day. So
do you have a saying when times get tough, when adversity strikes you?
Not really. I mean, one of the big ideas behind Smarter, Faster, Better is that what studies show is that the most productive people are people who tend to set time aside to try and think more deeply, right? So I think when things aren't going well, one of the things I try and do is I try and sort of take 15 or 20 minutes just to try and figure out like how can I force myself to think, and maybe that means that I need to like go for a run, right? Because sometimes it's easier to think when I'm running without like a podcast or anything. Maybe it means I need to sit down and like write a letter to like myself or my wife explaining what's going on and how I'm going to think about it. But I would say that's the pattern that I get into, rather than sort of a phrase, is to try and push myself to think more deeply about what's going on so that I can really think about how I ought to respond.
All right, there it is. We got something to try and push myself to think more deeply about how I should respond. What happens if you don't do that? So you get hit with something and you don't set the time aside to think more deeply, and you are just overwhelmed with what is happening to you.
Well, usually I make worse choices than I would have otherwise, right? Like, I mean, I don't know that there's something that happens every single time, but definitely the outcome tends to be less optimal than if I can set aside some time and really like say like, look, one of the big ideas behind Smarter, Faster, Better is that the most productive people, they tend to engage in these contemplative routines, right? And these contemplative routines are basically a habit to make yourself think, particularly when thinking is hard. So for some people, that means that they they write a letter every Sunday night, or to a friend to kind of reflect on the last week, or they have like a getting things done ritual where they just sit down and they sort of plan out the coming week and work out a calendar, or maybe in my case, every day they come home and they describe to their wife or their husband what happened that day, because the act of sort of recounting it helps you figure out what you did well and what you didn't do well, and it forces you to analyze it a little bit. The point is that life is so busy right now that most of us can actually go an entire day, an entire week without actually thinking that hard and reflecting on what we ought to be doing. We're busy instead of productive. And what we know is that the people who escape that trap are the ones who have some kind of ritual that forces them to think about what they're doing and ask themselves, am I making the best choices that I can?
Mm-hmm. So like instead of working in your life, you're working on your life, like a big picture view to make sure that you're going down the right paths.
Yeah, I mean, not all the time because I actually have to get stuff done. But I try and have this daily ritual where I describe my day to my wife. I mean, it only takes like 10 or 15 minutes. But the point is that by describing it as honestly to her as I can, it helps me figure out whether I made good choices or not.
Okay. So what kind of questions would you ask yourself when you're really thinking deeply about a situation? What are some common questions that you typically tell yourself?
Usually it's like, what is my goal, right? Like what does a best case outcome look like? What do I actually want to have happen here? Not how do I satisfy whatever the immediate demand is, or how do I sort of conform to what success should look like for someone else, but what do I actually want out of this?
Yeah.
Because I think that really reveals like why you're doing the things that you're doing and what you should do to make them better.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we can get so caught up in chasing goals that are set by other people's standards or society or comparing ourselves to other people and feeling like we're not enough. But when we sit back and what do I really want? Because that's really what's going to make you happy.
Yeah, no, it's really, and it's very easy to lose track of that, right? Like I think like the whole point of like thinking when thinking is hardest is that it oftentimes forces you to think more deeply about like, why am I actually doing this stuff?
Mm-hmm. So is this the danger of habits? Because a habit to me is like a daily routine or a ritual that you are doing consistently without much thought. Like it's just something you do. It's just a part of your life. It's become embedded in your daily schedule. It's something that you always consistently do. But if we're in that sort of mindset, we're probably not thinking at the highest level because it's just something that we do. It's almost like autopilot. And is that why you introduced this? Like, hey, take some time. What are you actually doing? Is that why that's there?
Well, yeah. So what we know is that 40 to 45% of what we do every day is in fact a habit, right? Studies have shown this, particularly this study by a woman named Wendy Wood, who was at Duke at the time and is now at USC. So almost half of what you do every single day is a habit. Uh-huh. And every habit we know has the same basic structure. A habit is actually made up of three parts. There's a cue, which is like a trigger for an automatic behavior, and then a routine, which is the behavior itself, and then finally a reward. And that reward is how your brain learns to kind of latch on to that chunk of behavior for the future.
If we're missing that reward, does it kill the habit? I'm thinking that was kind of like the key thing there.
Yeah, the reward is very important, but if you don't have a reward, there is no habit in the first place.
Okay.
so you might not be aware of the reward, but every single habit you have has a reward.
Okay.
Right? In fact, we know that, like, for instance, when people get in the habit of being able to back their car out of the driveway, into the street, there's actually, if you could look inside their head, what you would see is that they feel this small, very almost minuscule sense of relief and satisfaction, which is a reward when they successfully navigate into the street.
So it's an unconscious reward. It's not like I give myself chocolate for backing out of the car.
No. Oftentimes these rewards happen at the near unconscious level.
Okay.
And so once you understand how these habits work, you can have control over them, right? You have more influence over your life. And I think what's important about that is that therefore it begins to raise this question. So what do you want your habits to be? And some habits we know are much more productive and much more important than others, including creating habits where you reward yourself. There's a cue and there's a reward around thinking more deeply about the choice you're about to make so that you don't make a bad choice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of my favorite quotes about habits is by Ben Franklin. He says, your net worth to the world is determined by what remains after your bad habits are subtracted from your good ones.
Yeah, no, I think that he recognizes that it certainly matters a lot, the big decisions you make, who you marry, what job you're going to take, right? But we tend to spend a lot of time thinking about those big decisions and focusing on them. Just as important are the small decisions that you make every single day. So it doesn't matter what you have for lunch today, but what you have for lunch every day has huge implications for how healthy you are. It doesn't matter if you spend an extra $10 today on Uber rather than taking the subway, but whether you take the subway or Uber every single day has tremendous implications for your financial security. And that's the point, is that once you figure out that your habits are really, really important in terms of determining whether you're successful or not.
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. And I going back to what you were saying originally about it's important to set aside a time to think about, what is it that I want? Like, what do I really want? A habit that I had, and I would say it's a good habit that likely a lot of people want to work on, is going to the gym consistently. And it was just something that I started doing since I was 15. And I'm 30 now. And I look back at this 15 years of being in the gym, and so much of what I was doing inside that habit was just comparing myself to other people in the gym and feeling like I'm not where I need to be. And I need to constantly be lifting more. I need to constantly be getting bigger. Otherwise, I'm not making progress. And I need to get that six pack. I need to be benching more. Every quarter I need to be benching more. And I finally got to this peak probably when I was about 28, where I was the biggest, the strongest. And I had achieved pretty much everything that I wanted. And looking around, I was like, I'm one of the biggest guys in the gym now at certain times of the day. And it felt kind of cool. But then once I got it, I was just like, is this really what I want? And what I found was what I really want is just to be fit, healthy, and pain-free. Like, that's actually what I really want. And it just took so much weight off my training, so much stress off me when I adjusted my habit to something that was more aligned with what I actually want, instead of trying to like have this ego competition that I felt was kind of unconscious in the gym.
Yeah, no, I think that's really powerful, because I think that this is another. There's a chapter in Smarter, Faster, Better about motivation, and one of the things that we know is that essentially the trigger for motivation. It's impossible to self-motivate if you don't feel some measure of control. And in fact, the more that you give yourself a sense of control, the easier it is to motivate. So one of the big sort of takeaways from that is if you can turn a chore into a choice, even by finding like an arbitrary choice, right? Like I'm going to start this test on question number 2, or if I have to clean the house, I'm going to choose which part of the house to clean first. That those choices actually make it easier to self-motivate. And I think one of the reasons why that's true is because when we make a choice, we are in fact asking ourselves, what matters to me? Like, what do I care about? And I'm going to act on that. And that's really powerful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I feel like you have more control of the direction of your life rather than just doing a habit. Because I think it's good to have habits and do something, but if you're climbing up a ladder that's leaned up against the wrong wall, it might make you unhappy when you get to the top.
Absolutely.
Right. So with being productive, I think when we talk about productive, I think it's like working more, like getting more done throughout the day. At the end of the day, you feel this feeling of, I did it. I feel good about the day. I moved the needle forward. These are all good signs, but I feel like you can get addicted to that. So one who is very productive can stay in that path where they're just always having to do things and be busy, to where if they are ever at a point where they are not doing things, like, so let's say they're on a family vacation, they're like starting to feel bad about not being productive. What advice do you have for these fellas who are constantly productive to the point where it is impeding into their personal life and family and friends?
Well, I would say that probably the first question there is to ask what productivity actually is to that person, right? Mm-hmm. So because what you're describing doesn't sound like productivity. It sounds like someone who is just busy all the time, like they need to be busy all the time. And I think that that's an important distinction to make, because there's an important difference between busyness and productivity. And the difference there is largely around, have you decided what productivity is for you? And productivity changes from place to place and person to person and day to day, right? So a productive Wednesday for me might be one where I get the kids out the door really fast into school, and I get to my desk and I'm like on top of everything. But a productive Friday might be one where I can walk my kids to school and I can talk to them about what's going on, and I don't feel rushed or stressed at all. And so the first thing to do, much like trying to figure out like what is your goal, is to figure out what is the definition of productivity to you. Now, if you find that you're like supposed to be hanging out with your family, and it's, Thanksgiving was just recently occurred, right?
Right.
So a lot of people, I think, probably were like, they were with their families and they're like, oh my God, I've got so many emails I need to deal with, and like, I don't want to be here. Are they feeling that way because they actually like would prefer to be working, or because they don't like being around their family and it's hard to admit that to ourselves? I mean, there's a lot of questions there. And And I think what's important is that as you start to think more about that, right? Again, the killer productivity app throughout history has always been thinking, right? People who think more and think more deeply are people who are more productive. And so the question is, how can you get yourself to think more deeply? Does that mean that before you do something, you need to just sit down and figure out what do I want to do with this? Or is it that you need to have some other conversation with yourself? But there's something there that will help you figure out, why do I have this urge to be busy all the time? What is it covering up, or what is it responding to?
Yeah.
And the only way you get beyond that is really to sit down and figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah. What would you say are 3 questions that one should ask themselves on a quarterly basis, or definitely an annual basis with going into the new year, that would really help course correct the path for them? So we have, I think, what do I really want, but what else could be some other ones?
Well, I think, okay, so in Smarter, Faster, Better, there's a whole chapter about this, about what we know about the science of goal setting, right? And so all the research seems to indicate is that you want kind of 2 kinds of things going on. You want a stretch goal and you want a SMART goal, or a proximal goal and a distant goal. So the stretch goal is what's the most ambitious thing that you could hope to do in the next year, right? Like sky's the limit. Do you want to, if your answer is, I want to make $12 million, that's probably not something you can do in a year. But in a year, if you could only get one thing done, what would that one thing be? That's your stretch goal, the biggest ambition you have. Now, the problem with stretch goals is that they awaken our ambition and our motivation, but sometimes they are so distant or so overwhelming that they can actually undermine motivation. And so the other thing that you should do is, what is the first step towards that goal? Right? And so the way that we, scientists or researchers have a bunch of ways of sort of operationalizing this or making it easier to do. One of them is called SMART goals, where literally they just say, okay, take that big goal out there and just take some small piece of it and just ask yourself, okay, specifically, what do I want to get done in the next week? And how am I going to measure success? And is this achievable? And is it realistic? And what's the timeline around it? How many resources do I need, et cetera? Just something to force you to take a goal and make it into a plan. And once you have a plan, so now you've got this big goal that's off in the future that you know what you want to be moving towards. You know how to start tomorrow morning, right? Because you have a plan for the next week. And I think those are the first 2 questions that you should be asking yourself. And the third is, how am I going to make sure that I remain focused on this? How am I going to build some routine into my life so that I remain balanced and productive as opposed to busy? And I think if you're to ask yourself that every 3 months, those 3 questions, I think you'd be doing pretty good.
Yeah. I love the journaling. I love towards the end of the year when I sit back and I reflect on how the year went, and I look at what I want to achieve in the next year. It's always an exciting time. But then obviously it comes down to turning a lot of these goals into habits and taking action, and not just knowing what to do, but actually sitting down and doing the work consistently to get the goal that I'd like to have.
Yeah. And so a big part of that, I think, is figuring out how are you going to reward yourself, right? Because let's say your big goal is you want to run a marathon, and your SMART goal, your plan for the next week, is that you're going to go running 1 time. We all know that in order to make that a habit, you're going to need to build some kind of rewards, because the reward of running a marathon, that's too far off for it to be meaningful. And the first couple times you go running, the novelty of it might be really rewarding, but then there is a point at which running becomes kind of a slog, right? So how are you going to reward yourself in those intermediate steps? How are you going to take advantage of that? And I think that actually sitting down and saying, this is the reward I'm going to give myself when I hit my first 5-mile run. Mm-hmm. This is the reward I'm going to give myself when I go for 3 days in a row. That's really, really important.
Got it. Having the reward in place. If we do not have the reward in place, is that what would create a burnout?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of things that contribute to burnout, but that's definitely part of it. Mm-hmm. Is that without a reward in place, it's very hard for your brain to understand why this is something that you might want to do.
Great. The working world has changed. With the growth of the internet, there's never been more opportunities for the self-employed. To meet this need, FreshBooks is excited to announce the launch of an all-new version of their cloud accounting software. It's been redesigned from the ground up and custom built for exactly the way you work. Get ready for the simplest way to be more productive, organized, and most importantly, get paid quickly. The all-new FreshBooks is not only ridiculously easy to use, it's also packed full of powerful features. Create and send professional-looking invoices in less than 30 seconds, set up online payments with just a couple of clicks and get paid up to 4 days faster, see when your client has seen your invoices, and put an end to all the guessing games. And I'm excited to announce that FreshBooks is offering a 30-day unrestricted free trial to my listeners. To claim it, just go to freshbooks.com/men and enter Knowledge for Men in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Again, that's freshbooks.com and enter Knowledge for Men in the How Did You Hear About Us section.
Welcome to the Knowledge Round, where the guests will be asked rapid-fire questions to give the audience invaluable pieces of wisdom to help transform their lives. Starting in 3, 2, 1, showtime.
What would you say have been 3 of your most influential books that have helped you on your journey?
3 of the most influential books that have helped me. I mean, so I'm a nonfiction writer, right? I was until recently a reporter with the New York Times.
Yes.
So most of the books that are most influential to me have to do with storytelling and with writing.
Okay.
So Liar's Poker by Michael Lewis, I think, is like an example of a kind of writing that's really important to me. Draft Number 9, and the same is true of The Right Stuff by Tom Wolfe. Draft Number 9 by John McPhee has been really, really influential. And I'm trying to think what other books I've read. I mean, none of them are like books that are kind of advice books.
That's okay. Yeah, that's interesting.
I tend to learn much more by observing than by sort of someone telling me how to do something.
That's fun. That's fun.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm reading actually a great book right now.
Okay.
This has nothing to do with like any advice, but it's called Void Star. It's really, really, it's a great book. It's really well done.
That's great. And that's interesting too. I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves that we have to read a book that is about, personal development, business success, productivity, these kind of things. So that's refreshing to hear from yourself. If just a quick scenario for yourself, if you had 60 seconds with your 25-year-old self, Charles, if you could envision where he's at personally and professionally, what would you tell him to do and what would you tell him not to do?
Well, I think the number one thing I would say is, and I think this is really important advice, is to just assume that you're going to be successful at whatever you choose to do. Because I think in a lot of ways, we oftentimes make choices where we're trying to balance our ambition, what we want to do, versus what we think we can actually do. And I think we tend to underestimate how good we are or the odds of success. One of the things that I found is that people tend to be much more successful over time than they anticipated they would be. And so as a result, if you start down one path because you think that path is a safer bet, then you find that actually you could have taken a riskier bet and you would have turned out just fine because you would have been successful at it. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the thing that I would have that and saying like you can't overestimate the importance of happiness, right? That making a choice where the truth of the matter is that like no matter what your job is, you have to show up for your job every day. And if you don't like your job, you're not going to do a great job at it.
Yeah.
So the key is to try and find things where it seems interesting every day so that whether it's going poorly or going well, that matters less than do you enjoy today?
Yeah. Because
that ultimately is going to lead you to more fortune.
Very, very good. Guys, for all those listening, check out Charles' work. Charles Duhigg, let me spell that out, Duhigg.com. So charlesduhigg.com. Also, I think the best place to go to get his book, so just go to Amazon and you can type in Charles Duhigg, Duhigg. And he's got Smarter, Faster, Better. And his book on habits, these are Power of Habit. These are very influential book, hundreds of 5-star reviews. It looks like, I think, even thousands on the Power of Habit. Congrats there.
Yeah.
That's great. This has been a very impactful show. Thank you for your time, Charles, and coming on here and sharing some lessons here with my community.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for listening to the Knowledge for Men podcast. Hundreds of interviews and millions of downloads later, we're continuing to build an international movement and we're just getting started. So if you enjoyed this episode, go ahead and leave a helpful review in iTunes because it really helps the podcast grow so we can impact even more men in the world who need this. Guys, this is all about living with purpose, where every day you only do things that matter to you. You wake up, live with purpose, and take massive action towards the life you want. And always remember, love the life you have while creating the life of your dreams. Go to kfmfree.com to get a surprise bonus I've made for my listeners. Again, that's kfmfree.com for something that's changed my life, and I'm offering it to you for free. Also, check out my Amazon best-selling books that I've written for you to help you crush life at kfmauthor.com. Again, that's kfmauthor.com to see all the books I've created to help you break through in life. This is your host, Andrew Farabee, founder of knowledgeformen.com, and I'll see you in the next episode.